There's no getting away from the rising cost of groceries and fuel. So how can we make our salaries stretch further during this time? To answer this, personal finance columnist Maya Fisher-French joins us now virtually to give us some advice. Maya, I mean, especially for the middle class, already people in that, in that part of society are paying a lot of money for a lot of things. The tax there is also quite huge. So what can people do to try and stretch their money? We know that they shouldn't be taking loans, for instance. What else?
It's quite interesting. I was going through my just my articles over the last few years, and since 2016, I've been writing, it's getting tougher. We need to be tightening our belts. And that's the reality. It's not just this year. It is accumulation of many years of where our salaries have just not been keeping up with the cost of living. And what we've been doing, instead of perhaps going back to the knitting and going through our costs and cutting, we've found it a lot easier to take on credit. And, I'm working with a lot of people at the moment who, when we look at it, it's like, yeah, well, the overdraft, it was easier to use my overdraft. It was just easier to use my credit card. And I think we're reaching that point when we look at what we're spending every month, and so much of it is going to debt repayment because of those years where we just it was just easier to use credit lines than look at expenses. But yet, when I do sit with someone, I say, let's go through your expenses. People are surprised. The bank fees. When did you last actually look at your bank fees and see if you could change your banking behavior? When did you last review your insurances, even your car insurances? I can tell you this weekend in our household, we looked at our meals and we said, right, beans are a lot cheaper than meat and protein. It's a great form of protein. We started pulling out the recipe books. I made a lot of batches of bean-based food, put them in the freezer. And that's the reality. It isn't nice. It's hard. It's so hard to stick to a budget. It's so hard to go through the expenses. But we can't keep doing this thing where we'll use our credit card, we'll use our overdraft because something's going to change, because it hasn't changed for 5 years. It's been 5, nearly 6 years of this continual financial pressure. And at some point, we're going to have to start switching the light. Well, load shedding doing it for us, but I am walking around making sure the light switches are off, that I'm not overusing the oven, that I am watching fuel. How do we share a car, lift share? I think that's the reality. We're going to have to do the hard work now.
And maybe for some people, it's time to consider trading in that German car for something cheaper that will cost less in terms of paying back the bank and also cost less in terms of filling up the tank.
You've got to do your maths carefully on that one. But yes, if you are, and I must tell you, the little runaround, using up 5 litres per 100 is cheaper on fuel. It's much lower from an insurance perspective, from maintenance. So yes, I think we're going to see a really big upkick in those little runarounds, and possibly a lot more trade-ins on the bigger cars. But of course, a lot of people are locked into the financing of the fancy luxury German car, for example. So one does need to do the maths there. Unfortunately, it's not just as simple as just selling it, because you could actually be owing quite a lot of money on it. I really do think when we look at our householders, we're getting a lot more sensible about if one of us needs to be in town. My husband works in town. I'll go in with him, spend the day in town, rather than myself driving back and forth, looking at public transport. So it is just about also being a little bit more sensible about the trips that we're taking.
And I'm also realizing, there's a lot of people who have anxiety, Maya. I don't know, according to your research, if you've seen that. For instance, a person who would have been excited to buy a home at the right age, with the right amount of money, etc., becomes too anxious to take that big loan and would rather rent just in case something happens with their jobs, because there's also job losses, companies that are closing in this country. And then also parents who are opting to take their children out of very good schools in terms of their education to take them to something cheaper. So it's also getting to a point where we have no choice, but we have to leave the best for something average.
This is, and education's a very important one to consider. So when you are putting your child into a private school, for example, you actually need to extrapolate those figures. If your child's entering grade 1, what are those school fees going to be like by the time they reach grade 12? Because school fees go up actually above inflation, and there's a grade jump. So, you know, the difference between grade 5 and grade 8 is not just inflation, it's also that each grade, high school becomes more expensive. So as you go up the grades, they become more expensive. And I think if you do those numbers, you'll realize that you're taking on a really, really big financial commitment going forward. So what I see a lot of parents doing is they're sort of saying, right, well, maybe for high school, I can focus on perhaps the private school, or vice versa. Maybe if I give my child a really good grounding in primary school, that will help. And I'm also seeing a lot of parents actually looking more at homeschooling. So education's a very big one for parents. They want to give their children more, but they've got to do the numbers and make sure that whatever they're offering their child, they can be consistent with and offer it through. But then the flip side is I see them go and buy the car with the big finance. And I'm like, we've got to start making decisions. Is it the car with the big repayment, or is it my child's education? And I can tell you which one I think is more important.
Is more important, exactly. Priorities, right? But I want to ask you about myself, Maya. You know, I just need some advice from you. I really was considering getting myself a pit bull, but I looked at how much it would cost to feed that pet, firstly, because it's quite a big dog. So when it comes to people like me who actually love animals, and I was thinking of getting one already right now, maybe I should wait?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. You've got to look at it and say, what, again, my priorities. It's not about, I love probably the best quote I love is that you can have anything. You just can't have everything. Okay. So if you want to get a dog, by the way, I have to tell you, you've got a budget for pet insurance in there. I've done that. Pet insurance has saved me a fortune over the years, but that's about 300, 400 Rand a month. So you've got to add that in. Then you've got the dog food. But then look at your budget and say, what is it in my budget that I'm prepared to give up in order to have the dog? It's not about not having the dog. It's about that trade-off, those priorities. That would be I mean, I'm also a pet lover. I would find it very hard to give up my dog because I can't afford it. So
exactly.
I'd probably give up a couple of other things.
Exactly, and that's another mouth to feed. So just something fun. Lastly, Maya, date night. I mean, I was looking at my, you know, in my household, and I was thinking, gosh, I'm that type of woman who insists on date night because I always feel like I don't want my relationship to be boring. So what do you do then if you're a couple that is used to at least taking each other out once a week? Do we cook at home and maybe just have a picnic in our own garden?
You are a woman after my own heart. I have date night every week, and it's actually non-negotiable in my budget. Yep. So you're talking to the right person. Yeah, what we've done it often is just saying, okay, maybe it's going to a lovely bar and having a glass of wine instead of dinner. Maybe it's a movie, and of course with the reward programs, if you happen to belong to a reward program, the movie can be quite inexpensive. Maybe we're doing a movie together. So I just look at, I still do it. I cannot, that's one thing, and I do leave home. You know, if you've got, home is like things get in the way. If you've got children, you know, the kids are there. It's just, for me, it's a place that I can breathe. And my husband and I really catch up. And often this will be the discussion about whether or not we put solar panels in the house. That's where we do. These are just important discussions happen. Or we'll flip it around and make it a breakfast instead of a dinner, which dinners are more expensive. So I do not let anyone get between me and date night. But I do look at how we can. We also have another rule like it's only one glass of wine, which is probably good anyway. You know, those sorts of things. So yeah, I think it stays in my budget, I have to be honest.
Yeah, it's going to stay in my budget as well, Maya. Thank you so much for speaking to us here on All Angles. That was personal finance columnist Maya Fisher-French.